Merci de prendre place, s'il vous plaît.
Please take your seats. We're going to get down to work.
Donc,
our program for this morning is to hear the working group reports followed by the regional reports. All of the working group reports are available on the website. I would like to give the floor to the Secretariat for some additional information. You have the floor. Thank you, Madam Chair. We had a problem for the RST.com document in Spanish. We've heard nothing from the Spanish translator. So the RST document in Spanish is not available. We're trying to find an interim solution to give you at least a machine translation. And what we're going to do for the species country combinations for Spanish-speaking countries, we will try to get a translator to deal with the recommendations for those countries. We hope to be able to give you the document in Spanish within the hour, but please do bear in mind it's going to be largely machine translation and we cannot make any guarantees as to its quality. I wanted that to be clear. Then we have the ComDocs, and then we also have the sum document for yesterday's meeting, and that is available on the website. Thank you. Thank you, Secretariat. We are going to move on to the working group on maps, and I would like to give the floor to the chair of that working group, Medicinal and Aromatic Plants. You have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We started as a very large working group, Tuesday late afternoon for 2 hours, and then on Wednesday afternoon from 2 to 5. So our mandate was further improve the draft resolution on medicinal and aromatic plant species in the annex to document PC27 Doc 32.2 in line with decision 19.263 paragraph B, and formulate recommendations for consideration of the committee in line with decision 19.263 paragraph C. So we had very intense discussions on the draft document, which resulted from the intersessional working group. And during the discussion, we realized the complexity of a new resolution. We felt that the draft resolution will not be ready for consultation at the next meeting of the Standing Committee SE 78. Also because we could not take into consideration the results of the study, and the outcome of the study will have an impact on further development. Therefore, our recommendation as follows. The working group recommends the Plants Committee to agree in accordance with decision 19.263C, report to the Conference of the Parties, propose draft decisions to the Conference of the Parties at its 20th meeting as follows. Directed to the Secretariat 20AA, the Secretariat shall finalize the study developed on the decision 19.261, paragraph C, and summarized in document PC27 Doc 32.1 at for the consideration of the Plants Committee. Work with the nomenclature specialist of the Plants Committee and the United Nations Environmental Programme, World Conservation Monitoring Center, to consider the identified discrepancies listed in annexes 2 to 4 of document PC27 Doc 32.1 at, and identify whether corrections or improvements to the nomenclature in CITES databases are necessary. C, subject to external funding, implement cross-references between CITES databases and the medicinal plant names database for CITES-listed maps, taking into account the technical advice of the Plants Committee agreed at its 26th meeting, see summary record PC 26 SR, and D, report to the Plants Committee. Directed to the Plants Committee 20BB, the Plants Committee shall review the study and the reports submitted by the Secretariat in accordance with Decision 20AA. B, further improve the draft resolution on medicinal and aromatic plants contained in the annex to document PC 27.3, taking into account the reports submitted by the Secretariat under Decision 20AA, and C, report to the Standing Committee. Then directed to the Standing Committee, 20CC, the Standing Committee shall review the report of the Plants Committee and make recommendations to the Conference of the Parties as appropriate. 3, agree that decisions 19.261 to 19.264 have been mostly completed and should be recommended to be replaced at COP20 by decision 20AA to 20CC. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Je remercie.
I would like to thank the chair of the Working Group on Medicinal and Aromatic Plant Species. The floor is open to other members of the Plant Committee for any comments they might have. Observer parties and observers are also welcome to take the floor. The floor is open.
États-Unis.
The United States, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. We thank the Working Group for its report and especially note our appreciation for all the efforts of the Working Group Chair. Overall, we support the recommendations of the Working Group. The draft decisions allow for continued deliberation to build on the work from this intersessional period and ultimately reach better informed outcomes concerning this important topic, including the contents of a future resolution, if any. However, we recommend the following edits to draft decision 20BB, paragraph B. For precision, to ensure all relevant information is considered and any appropriate recommendations can be made based on continued discussions. So it would add continue to consider, delete, further improve, the draft resolution on medicinal and aromatic plants contained in the annex to document PC 27, COM 3, add including, taking into account the report submitted by the Secretariat under Decision 20AA, and add and make any recommendations as appropriate. Thank you, Chair.
Je remercie.
I would like to thank the representative of the United States, and I now give the floor to the United Kingdom.
Thank you, Chair, and for the Working Group's work on this topic. We would like to align with the comments made by the USA. We would like clarification about decisions 20AA, little b and little c, if these fall under decisions for the trade and medicinal and aromatic plant species document or under botanical nomenclature matters. We also have a minor amendment to decision 20AA, little c. Please, could the name of the Medicinal Plant Names database be edited to Medicinal Plant Names Services instead? Thank you.
Merci à la
Thank you, the United Kingdom. I now give the floor to Mexico. Thank you, Madam. We, too, would like to thank the chair of the working group for her work. I just have one comment. In the final version, it would be very useful to have, in addition to the draft resolution with all the details, but to have a clean version too. It would be very easy. It'd be easier for us to find the preamble and the operative part and to better understand what is to be happening in the future. So I think the Secretariat can make sure that we have a clean copy. So it's very useful to have a version tracking all the changes, but anyone who's new to all of this would be grateful for a copy that made the situation very clear. Thank you. Thank you. Mexico. I would like to give the floor to the chair of the working group to reply to the United Kingdom. You have the floor, madam.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm not sure if I can properly answer this question because I think it was the result of the nomenclature working group, and maybe Martin could clarify this. Thank you.
Merci à la présidente.
Thank you, madam. I give the floor to the Secretariat.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Ursula. Indeed, the paragraph B of draft decision 20AA has been considered by the nomenclature working group as well as the MAPS working group. As of the moment, it is part of the draft decision on medicinal and aromatic plant species, but clearly falls into the scope of nomenclature considerations. And I would envision that to be considered by nomenclature working groups in the future as well. So currently it's a mixture. That's the answer. It could be certainly done in a different way, but currently it's this way. Thanks.
Merci.
I'd like to thank the Secretariat for that clarification. I don't see any further requests for the floor. I would now like to ask the following question. With respect to the amendments in para 2 of the recommendations which have to do with draft decisions are acceptable to the plenary. The floor is open.
Je ne vois pas.
I don't see any requests for the floor. The Plants Committee adopts PC 27.3 as submitted and amended in plenary. Thank you.
Nous passons.
We're now going to move on to PC 27.4. This is the report of the Working Group on Flora nomenclature. I would like to give the floor to the nomenclature specialist. You have the floor, madam.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We thank the members of the Working Group for the valuable discussions on the nomenclature topics and for their comments and suggestions that allowed us to productively work through the very large mandate of this Working Group and to reach consensus on a way forward on all topics under discussion. The outcomes of our agreements are reflected in document PC27.4, which includes recommendations for the Plants Committee to agree on the following. That the committee invite the nomenclature specialist to develop draft decisions in consideration for the conference of the parties, to liaise with editors of global databases containing plant distribution information on the possibility of providing such information on an ISO country level. Further, to invite the Secretariat, in collaboration with UNEP WCMC and the nomenclature specialists, to consider a best practice approach for presenting species included in higher taxa listings in the CITES databases, especially where standard nomenclature references do not include all species, and to consider the recommendations contained in the annex of document PC27 COM4 as follows. Under mandate point A regarding the Cactaceae, to submit the draft decisions on Cactaceae as provided in paragraph A of this section of the annex, to agree with the proposal to address the matter of Turbinicarpus ex rosei floris as part of the terms of reference for a revised checklist, and to agree that decisions 18.304 and 18.306 have been implemented and can be proposed for deletion. Regarding Dalbergia species, to note the new species described since adoption of the checklist, to recommend that any required revisions to the checklist can be coordinated under the provisions of Resolution 12.11, and to agree that decisions 18.307 and 18.308 have been implemented and can be proposed for deletion. Regarding taxa species, to recommend the renewal of decisions 19.290 and 19.291 at COP20 in order to finalize a checklist for consideration at COP21. Regarding Bulnesia sarmientoi, to propose the reference and note as outlined in this section of the annex for adoption at COP20 as the standard nomenclature reference for this species to be included in Resolution 12.11. Regarding the bulb genera Cyclamen, Galanthus, and Sternbergia, to request development of separate time-stamped database extracts for consideration as standard nomenclature references at COP20, and to agree to the amended draft decisions in paragraph B of this section of the annex. Regarding Aguilaria and Gyronops, to propose the adoption of updated time-stamped database extracts similar to those in Annex 1 and 2 of document PC27 Doc 41.1 as standard nomenclature references for adoption at COP20, and to propose the amended draft decisions and as contained in paragraph B of this section of the annex. Regarding the nomenclature of Paucarnia, to agree that inclusion of Paucarnia hookeri and Paucarnia glassihana is a substantive amendment, and therefore to invite the depository government, in collaboration with Mexico, to assess the two species with regard to the listing criteria under Resolution 9.24, and to submit a listing proposal to COP20 as appropriate in accordance with paragraph 2F of Resolution 12.11. And further to recommend for consideration at COP20 the reference as outlined in paragraph B of this section of the annex as the standard nomenclature reference for Paucarnia, along with a note, if appropriate, indicating exclusion of the two previously mentioned species. Regarding the correct name for Nardostachys grandiflora, to propose for consideration at COP20 adoption of the reference in this section of the annex as the standard nomenclature reference for this species. Regarding a standard reference for Anacampsaros, to request the nomenclature specialist to consider various options and further investigate the best standard nomenclature reference for the genus Anacampsaros species, including Avonia, including a potential update of the family name, and to propose draft decisions for consideration at COP20. Then under mandate point B, regarding PC27 Doc 41.5 on the nomenclature of dipteric species, to request the nomenclature specialist to review the publication in paragraph A of this section of the annex to assess its similarity to the time-stamped extract and to download a new time-stamped extract shortly before COP20 for submission and adoption as standard nomenclature reference, and to agree that decision 19.283 has been implemented and can be proposed for deletion. Regarding PC27, Doc 41.6 on nomenclature of Kaya species, to agree that the current standard nomenclature reference for the genus Kaya can be retained, and that decisions 18.307 and 18.308 have been implemented and can be proposed for deletion. Regarding PC 27, Doc 41.8, on standard nomenclature for rose roots or rhodiola species, to agree that the taxonomy followed in the time-stamped extract would not alter the original scope of the listing, to propose a new time-stamped extract similar to the one provided in Annex 1 to document PC27 Doc 41.8 for adoption at COP20 as the standard nomenclature reference, and to agree that decision 19.289 has been implemented and can be proposed for deletion. Regarding PC27 Doc 41.2 on nomenclature for aloes, to agree to use the genus classification as outlined in paragraph 7 of document PC27 Doc 41.2, to invite the depository government, in consultation with South Africa, to submit a listing proposal for the 4 aloe species previously treated in the genus Cortellarion for Appendix 2 to COP20, in accordance with paragraph 2F of Resolution 12.11, to propose the aloe checklist for adoption as standard nomenclature reference at COP20, contingent on amendments required relating to the listing proposal to be submitted by the depository government, and to agree that decisions 19.279 and 19.280 have been implemented and can be proposed for deletion. Regarding PC27 Doc 41.4 on nomenclature of ebonies, Diospyros species, populations of Madagascar, to note that the listing of Diospyros species comprises the entire genus for populations of Madagascar. To note that the draft checklist includes 8 unpublished species and request the nomenclature specialist to assess if these should be included and provide clarification in her report to COP20. And to request a correction on page 3 of the checklist where the wrong COP decision is currently cited. And further, to submit the checklist with clarifications for consideration and adoption as standard nomenclature reference at COP20, and to agree that decisions 19.281 and 19.282 have been implemented and can be deleted. Regarding PC27 Doc 41.7 on nomenclature for Pachypodium species, to propose the Pachypodium checklist for adoption as standard nomenclature reference at COP, and to agree that the decisions 19.287 and 19.288 have been implemented and can be deleted. Regarding PC27 Doc 41.3 on the nomenclature for Appendix 2 listed orchids, to note that the current nomenclature reference for orchids does not include all genera of the orchid family, but only those that dominate international trade in orchids. To include in the draft decisions and terms of reference of the study an additional step to reanalyze which orchid genera are in trade and to tailor updating of the standard nomenclature reference to those genera found to dominate trade. To request the Secretariat that the title of the checklist be adapted to specify that it only comprises genera found in international trade, and to propose draft decisions for consideration of COP20 as outlined in this section of the annex. And then finally, under mandate point C, to agree to submit the amended version of the draft decisions in this section of the annex for consideration at COP20. However, a small correction is required to draft decision 20AA little a, and I will read from about the middle of that paragraph, and identify whether corrections or improvements to the nomenclature of CITES databases are necessary, where the words "are necessary" is currently in strike-through, whereas they should instead be underlined as insertions. So this correction should be implemented in the English and the French version of the document, because it seems like the Spanish version is indeed correct. So, Madam Chair, based on the careful deliberations and agreements of the working group, I extend an invitation to the Plants Committee to adopt the recommendations contained in report PC27 COM4. Thank you very much.
Je remercie.
I thank the nomenclature specialist for the presentation of this working group report. Do we have any comments following the presentation of the document? And there's a minor amendment in one of the decisions that was introduced. The floor is open.
Je vois des demandes de...
I see some request for the floor, but first of all, I am going to request that the Secretariat gives us some more clarification. The Secretariat.
Thank you, Chair. As observed by the UK in the previous ComDoc, the draft decisions on maps, as they were considered by both working groups, are contained in both ComDocs, and to ensure complete alignment between them, we would propose that we adopt the draft decision 20AA in the section on document PC27 doc 32.1 ad, as it was adopted in ComDoc 3, and that implies to delete the last part of the sentence in decision 20AA that reads, based on the findings of the study on international trade and medicinal and aromatic plant species in brackets maps. If that is deleted, there will be complete alignment between the two draft decisions adopted in ComDocs 3 and 4, and there should be no contradiction between them. That's our proposal. Thank you very much.
Merci au secrétariat.
I thank the Secretariat for this clarification and for reminding us of this. Now I give the floor to the United Kingdom.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks to the nomenclature specialist for preparing this document, and thank you to the Secretariat for clarifying about the medicinal plants topic in both documents. We propose one minor amendment to the nomenclature document in Part 2C on Aquilaria and Gyronops in the draft decision 20AA little a Part 1 to remove the two words the genera. So it would read, review available data and information on the phylogeny, taxonomy and distribution of Aquilaria species and Gyronops species. Thank you.
Merci.
Thank you, United Kingdom. I now give the floor to Norway.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you to the nomenclature specialists also for leading the working group. We have a minor comment on membership for Europe PC members, both the representative, Ms. Moser, as well as the alternate, Mr. de Boer, participated in the in-session working group. We hope that the membership can be complemented after Ms. Moser by adding alternate for Europe, Mr. de Boer.
Merci au représentant de la Norvège.
I thank the representative of Norway. This amendment will be made
to the summary document which led to the setting up of this working group. Are there any further requests for the floor? I do not see any. So the Plants Committee adopts document PC27-4 as presented and amended at the meeting.
Nous passons maintenant à la
We shall now move to the reading of the document and report of the in-session working group on identification of timber and other wood products. Document PC27-5. The chair of the working group will present this. This is the representative for North America. I give you the floor.
Thank you, Chair. The report before you contains the results of the in-session working group on identification of timber and other wood products. The working group met for a 3-hour session on Wednesday afternoon. The mandate of the working group was A, to consider the progress achieved by the intersessional working group of identification of timber and other wood products, and the annexes 1 to 8 of document PC27, Doc 18.2. B, to consider the reflections on the status of the implementation of decisions 19.145 to 19.147 and the pertinence for any new or revised focus decisions. C, prepare draft recommendations for consideration of Standing Committee at SC 78, and D, to report its recommendations to the committee. The working group worked through the many components of the decisions, particularly in decision 19.147. You will note that some of the sub-decisions in 19.147 are recommended not to be renewed. The in-session working group took into consideration the considerable work undertaken by the intersessional working group members, other relevant processes, such as the study reviewing the timber repository that has been recently initiated by the Secretariat, CITES documents and activities concerning the CITES task force meeting on illegal trade and specimens of listed tree species. Some of the sub-decisions in decision 19.147 were assessed as being out of scope for the Plants Committee and its working groups as they deviate from the core mandate to provide scientific advice to support the implementation of CITES and would be best implemented by parties or other actors. Some of the decisions will be addressed by seeking information from parties through a notification that will be issued by the Secretariat that has been proposed, recommended to be issued by the Secretariat. And others were reflected in the in-session working group's general recommendations. The revised list of decisions directed to PC, to the Plants Committee, are more focused and aligned to the Plants Committee mandate. To conclude, the recommendations of the in-session working group are A, to note the progress achieved by the intersessional working group of identification of timber and other wood products and the annexes 1 to 8 of document PC 27, Doc 18.2. B, to note that measures and activities outlined in the outcome document of the CITES task force meeting on illegal trade in specimens of listed tree species address some of the aspects covered in decision 19.147, and that the Secretariat issued a notification to parties number 2024/079, inviting parties to submit information relating to the implementation of Decision 19.89 on the Task Force on Illegal Trade in Specimens of CITES listed tree species. C, invite the Secretariat to, subject to external funding, raise awareness relating to the online resources available on the Timber Identification Resources and Tools webpage on the CITES website. And D, agree to submit revised decisions for consideration by the Standing Committee at SC 78 for submission to COP20. I won't read the list of decisions, as there are many of them, but they are presented in the document following the last recommendation. So I invite the Plants Committee to adopt these recommendations as presented in the document. Thank you, Chair.
Merci au président.
I thank the chair of the Working Group on Identification of Timber and Other Wood Products, and the floor is now open to those who may wish to comment.
États-Unis, vous avez la parole.
USA, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The U.S. has one minor correction to the COM document on page 3. The decision directed to the Plants Committee in collaboration with relevant stakeholders, number B, where it says advice on possible mechanisms, that should be changed to advise to make it a verb. Thank you.
Merci.
Thank you to the representative of the United States. Are there any further requests for the floor?
Portugal, vous avez...
Portugal, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a remark on membership. Portugal is here in the membership, but we are not able to participate in the working group, so it's better maybe to be erased from the list. Thank you.
Merci au Portugal.
Thank you, Portugal. We will also amend the document accordingly, and we'll put it in the summary document on the establishment of the working group. I do not see any further request for the floor. So the Plants Committee adopts document PC 27.5 as amended, as presented and amended at the meeting. Thank you.
Nous passons maintenant.
So now we will go to document PC 27.6, which is the report of the working group on the review of significant trade in specimens of Appendix 2 species. The working group was chaired by the representative of Oceania and myself, and so I shall present the recommendations on items 15.3, and then I shall give the floor to the representative of Oceania for the presentation of recommendations linked to agenda item 15.4 on the post-COP19 review of significant trade. So on 15.3, paragraph A of the mandate for the working group. The working group examined progress made in the work on the recommendations.
Les 8 États de l'ère de répartition.
for the 8 range states that were subject to recommendations under that process. So to save time, I will highlight the elements of the recommendations on a case-by-case basis, but I would ask you to look and read all the text which is in the document PC 27-6 and which is submitted. The recommendations of the working group in document PC 27-6, I would like to draw the attention of the committee to the cases of Ghana and Sierra Leone, which were subject to intersessional consultation between the 77th meeting of the Standing Committee and the current and this meeting. So we came to a conclusion on the approval of quota for specific specimens which were based on NDFs submitted by the 2 parties and clarifications provided during our discussions by the delegations of Ghana and Sierra Leone. In the case of Gambia and Guinea-Bissau, the working group provided, amongst other matters, useful recommendations to assist those states in the preparation of the terms of reference for NDFs. In the case of Benin, Burkina Faso, Mali, and Nigeria, the working group recognized the significant progress made by the parties and agreed on recommendations that will assist them to continue progressing with some of the recommendations which have until now been pending. On paragraph B of the mandate, considering that the accelerated process for Article 13 is still underway for all the Pterocarpus erinaceus range states, the working group recommends that the Plants Committee do not make any further recommendations to the Standing Committee. So I now give the floor to the representative of Oceania to present the recommendations linked to agenda item 15.4. You have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. I am introducing the component of PC 27 ComDoc 6, which represents the outcomes of the working group on PC 27 Doc 15.4 review of significant trade. The working group's mandate was in accordance with paragraphs 1, little g and little I of Resolution Conf 12.8 Rev Cop 18, and for the species country combinations selected following the 19th meeting of the Conference of the Parties. At the 27th meeting of the Plants Committee, the in-session working group shall A. Undertake the tasks outlined in PC 27 Doc 15.4, paragraphs 14 to 17, in accordance with paragraphs 1, little g and little I of Resolution Conf 12.8 Rev Cop 18, and B. Report its recommendations to the committee. The working group considered the 14 species country combinations as presented in the table under paragraph 11 of PC 27 Doc 15.4. The working group considered the table presented under paragraph 11 of the document and recommended that 12 species country combinations be either retained as or recategorised as action is needed. The list of species country combinations for which action is needed is presented in the table on page 4 of ComDoc 6. The working group further considered that 2 species country combinations could be categorised as less concern. These include Gibbertia tasmanii, Cameroon, based on the publication of a 0 export quota for wild specimens, and Gyrinop species, Indonesia, based on the publication of a 0 export quota for living terrestrial trees. The list of species country combinations that have been recommended as categorised as less concern is presented in the table on page 5 of ComDoc 6. The working group developed recommendations for the 12 species country combinations that were identified as action is needed. These included short-term actions and long-term actions for the range states to implement, and where that it was considered appropriate. The recommendations were developed in accordance with paragraphs 1G and I of Resolution COP 12.8 Rev COP 18 and adhere to the basic principles of being time-bound, feasible, measurable and proportionate, as well as transparent, and promote capacity building where appropriate, as recommended in PC 27 Doc 15.4 Annex 3. The working group diligently considered the cases at hand and managed to discuss all species country combinations and formulate its recommendations to the Plants Committee. I do note that there were extended discussions on Aquilaria malacensis, Indonesia, in relation to source codes. Due to the limitations when the working group met for time, this species country combination may require additional consideration by the Plants Committee. Having said this, I do believe the working group has provided recommendations that will be of assistance to the Plants Committee in their deliberations. I also note that on page 16 of ComDoc 6, in regards to the species country combination for Aquilaria malacensis, Malaysia, I have made an error that I would like to correct. Under the recommended action column, the first short-term action should read, Roman numeral 1, establish, in consultation with the Secretariat and the Chair of the Plants Committee, an interim export quota within 90 days, and then continue on with the existing text. I invite the Plants Committee to review the report of the working group, and I thank the working group members, the Secretariat and the interpreters for their assistance in enabling us to complete our work. Thank you, Chair.
Merci.
Thank you. Well, charity begins at home, so I'd like to thank myself for having presented the report. And I would also like to thank the co-chair of that working group. Now the floor is yours for comment.
Je donne la parole à l'Asie.
Asia, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. First and foremost, the members of the Asia region would like to express our appreciation for the efforts put in by the working group for the review of significant trade and the chair and the co-chair of the Plants Committee over the course of 1.5 days and now additionally in this session. In reviewing page 4 of the ComDoc, we observed that in the case of Aquilaria crasna for Vietnam, the justification given for revising the provisional categorization to action needed is effectively the very action that the working group has proposed. This is therefore appears to be a circular argument and tautological even. We are saying that action is needed because this action is needed and not why the action is needed. So at this point, we would like to seek confirmation from the Secretariat whether the justification to amend the provisional category to action is needed must be based on available information suggesting that the provisions of Article 4 have not been implemented. Thank you.
Merci au représentant.
I thank the representative for Asia, and I will give the floor to the Secretariat in a moment. And I forgot to inform you that the Spanish version of document PC 27.6 is now available. So shall I take the other comments from Plant Committee members, and then we'll come to the Secretariat, and now give the floor to the representative of the Africa region.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We also thank the chairs for the working groups, for you and your Vice Chair, for good coordination during this working group. Madam Chair, the Africa region acknowledges that the NDF document submitted by Ghana needs to be improved. Africa notes that Ghana has made many efforts to comply with the CITES requirements. For that, Africa region requests that the Plant Committee accepts that Ghana submit a revised NDF document and the subsequent revised NDF document and the subsequent quota during the intercession period, so that we cannot wait until the coming meetings, but they can be considered within the subsequent intersession period. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Merci aux représentants.
I thank the representative for the Africa region and now give the floor to Portugal.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a small correction to the English version. In page 3, in what regards Pterocarpus erinaceus for Guinea-Bissau, there is an incorrect reference to Gambia instead of Guinea-Bissau in the, I believe it's the last paragraph regarding this country. It says Gambia instead of Guinea-Bissau. Yes, it's the last paragraph. Thank you. It's only in the English version. The other two are correct.
Merci pour.
Thank you for that correction. Do we have any further request for the floor?
La Malaisie.
Malaysia, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Malaysia, a co-Asian representative concern. The proposed decision as raised by Asian representative could set a precedent that significantly impact other countries. The Asian representative concern underscore the gravity of the far-reaching implication of this decision. If implemented, the decision could serve as a model for other nations to follow, potentially leading to a domino effect throughout the international community. This raised significant concern, as each country has unique circumstances and considerations that must be careful with before adopting a decision of this magnitude. Furthermore, the precedent set by this decision could have unintended consequences, potentially destabilizing regional and global dynamics, necessitating stakeholders to thoroughly consider for the potential ramifications. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Je remercie le représentant.
I thank the representative for Malaysia and I now give the floor to the representative of Ghana.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Ghana would like to associate itself with the presentation made by the African region. Thank you.
Je remercie le.
I thank the representative of Ghana and I now give the floor to Indonesia.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Indonesia would like to support Asia representative concerns as reiterated by Malaysia and other colleagues. Thank you.
Merci à l'Indonésie.
Thank you, Indonesia. I now give the floor to Canada.
Thank you, Chair. Canada would like to support the proposal by the African representative to have a revised NDF of Ghana considered prior to the next ordinary meeting of the Plants Committee. Thank you.
Je remercie
Thank you, Canada, for your statement. I now give the floor to China.
Thank you, Chair. China shares the concerns with the Asian representative. Thank you.
La parole est à.
I now give the floor to Germany.
Thank you, Germany. Apologies. I'll try again. It's early morning.
Jusqu'à preuve du contraire, c'est.
Up until now, it's chairwoman.
Germany aligns itself with the suggestion made by the representative of Africa, Ghana, and Canada not to set the period for the revised NDF until the next ordinary meeting of the Plants Committee. Thank you.
Merci au...
I'm going to return the same. So I'd like to thank the representative female of Germany.
Donc, je ne vois pas d'autres demandes de parole.
I see no further request for the floor. So I think the Secretariat had to give us a little more information. I can't remember, says the chair, what it was. It was on the concern raised by the Asia region on the justification column. Thank you, Secretariat.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to the representative of Asia for pointing that out. Yes, I think that the justification reads more as a fact rather than a justification. I don't have fresh in my mind the full WCMC annex, but perhaps it could be worded rather in terms of needing a more thorough basis through an NDF to justify or improving an NDF for wild specimens. Something along those lines. Would that help?
Je donne la parole.
I give the floor to the representative of Asia.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to the Secretariat for providing that response. My question was really about the principles that would underlie giving a justification for the amendment. For example, taking the case of Dalbergia melanoxylon for Tanzania, the justification here given is that additional biological information is needed. Therefore, action is needed. So, the additional biological information is needed because there is concern, for example, that the harvest or exports may be detrimental to wild populations. And so therefore, we are clarifying whether our understanding is correct that the underlying motivation for the justifications must be based on concerns over the ability to implement Article 4, which in essence is about the sustainability of harvest and whether harvest is detrimental to its population in the wild. Thank you.
Je remercie.
I would like to thank the representative for Asia.
Je donne la parole au secrétaire.
The Secretariat has the floor to reply to the representative for Asia.
So considering that the justification for the selection of these cases is detailed at length in the relevant annex of PC Doc 15.4, and to not risk taking too much time and revising the justification in the ComDoc, what we could propose as an alternative is to, we will pick up from the WCMC annex the relevant elements that were the underlying cause to bring these cases for selection. So we will include that proper justification in the summary record based on the annex of the document that was, in essence, the reason why the working group decided to categorize these species country combinations as action is needed. Could that work?
Asie, vous avez la parole.
Asia, you have the floor.
Thank you once again to the Secretary for the response. However, I would like to point out that the UNEP WCMC report actually categorizes Aquilaria crasna for Vietnam as less concern, which means that UNEP WCMC has not found any prima facie case that harvest exports of this species is detrimental to the wild population of this species in Vietnam.
Nous nous consultons.
We're just holding some consultations to be able to get back to the Asia region on this.
Merci.
Having consulted with the Secretariat and the co-chair of this working group, I am going to give the floor to the Secretariat for some clarification. And I do have some requests for the floor from observer parties and one observer. You have the floor, Secretariat.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for allowing some time just to make sure that we're getting this right. So we went back quickly to the assessment, and in fact, the original recommendation was less concerned, but there were some underlying concerns with regards to illegal trade, which is, you are correct, that is not an Article 4 issue. So, so because of this, the recommendation was originally less concern. And in the discussions of the working group, there, it was reminded to us that Vietnam has, in fact, stricter domestic measures, and that there is, in fact, a ban for wild specimens. So perhaps what we could suggest is, instead of revising from less concern, so it would remain as less concern in the second to last column, and instead of the justification that you see there, rather outlining the steps that would follow. So our recommendations to reassure on this stricter domestic measure would be to invite Vietnam to issue a notification to inform on this stricter domestic measure. And in addition to this, just for reassurance, also invite Vietnam to request the publication of a zero export quota for wild specimens.
Merci.
I would like to thank the Secretariat for that clarification. Let me give the floor to Asia for their feedback on this. Then I'll give the floor to observer parties and the observers who have requested it. Asia, you have the floor.
Thank you very much to the Secretariat for your patience, as well as patience of all parties on this issue. We follow the logic and we agree largely with what you have proposed, except for the whether or not to request or to invite Vietnam to publish a zero export quota. We note that the only self-reported exports of this species by Vietnam was 0.01 liters of oil for scientific purposes. And exports for scientific purposes can also include sending specimens for collaborative research across countries that improve our knowledge for the conservation of this species. If Vietnam wishes to voluntarily publish a zero export quota, I think that is up to them. But mandating countries to set zero export quotas when they might have unique circumstances, it actually could be counterproductive to the objectives of CITES. So we could perhaps suggest a middle ground, which is to invite Vietnam to consider if they would wish to explicitly set a zero export quota for commercial purposes.
Merci.
Thank you, the representative for Asia. I give the floor to Germany.
Thank you, Chair. When I recall correctly, we in the working group we discussed about the context that the species is critically endangered due to overhousing, and that there are uncertainties regarding ongoing wild harvest, at least at the illegal level, and that even though there is an export ban for wild source specimens in Vietnam, there are entries in the CITES trade database for wild source specimens, and that this could be due to misreporting, but it is at least unclear, and to prevent these misreporting cases or unclarity and then provide clarity, we agreed to request Vietnam to issue or to publish a zero quota. That was the reason, and I think this is still valid. If we now go over to staying with the initial less concern preliminary clarification by WCMC, then we should at least make it a bit more, let's say, harder or operational, and maybe forward this to the standing committee, somewhere like that. But simply inviting Vietnam on doing this is, from our perspective, not sufficient. Thanks.
Merci.
Thank you, Germany. I now give the floor to the United States of America. You have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The United States aligns itself with the concerns expressed by Germany. We had much discussion of this issue in the working group. And yes, it was a trade discrepancy. And if we go to least concern, then we can invite Vietnam, but the reason our enforcement people are telling us we need to see the zero quota so that if we're an importing country, we can in fact look that there is a zero quota, and basically then perhaps hold the shipment, refuse the shipment entry. It helps enforcement measures to know that we have a zero quota on the database. I would also suggest, since we did recommend the case of Mozambique to the Standing Committee, that perhaps it's not, as the Asia rep says, an Article 4 issue, but perhaps a compliance issue. And so I think we should refer this to the next Standing Committee to look at and have some research done on this trade discrepancy, but it is a critically endangered species, and importing countries are reporting source code W from Vietnam. Thank you.
Je remercie.
Thank you, the United States. I now give the floor to India, to be followed by Asia. India, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. India supports the statements of the Asian representative in this context. Thank you.
I've had another request for the floor from an observer party. I will give the floor to that observer party and then give the floor to Asia. There is also an observer who is waiting to take the floor. I would now like to give the floor to Portugal. You have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Portugal aligns itself with the comments previously made by the US and Germany. Thank you.
Merci.
Thank you. What I'm going to do is give the floor now to the observer who's been waiting to speak, and China can speak afterwards. WWF, you have the floor.
Madam Chair, first of all, yes, it's to respond to the point about UNEP WCMC made by the Asian representative. Yes, it's true that UNEP WCMC identified this as less concern, but WCMC's document is essentially advice to the committee and to the working group. Obviously, if we were going to take everything that they say at its face value, we wouldn't be having this discussion at all. And the final responsibility for categorization rests with the committee. When this came up in the working group, there were concerns expressed by Georgia about process, because in a situation where we're asking a country to set a zero quota, that means an action is needed. In simple English, zero quota is an action, so action is needed. So that was the logic for changing the categorization from less concern to action is needed. And I mean, essentially some way of, some kind of formula to avoid what the perceived stigma, which isn't indeed a stigma, that action is needed, by requiring a zero quota but still categorizing it as less concern, is effectively redrafting the resolution verbally in committee. It's not following the resolution as it is currently written. If we want to do that in the future, we should look at the text of the resolution, but we as WWF wouldn't favour such amendments. We're faced with a situation now where it's proposed that Vietnam be categorised as less concern and then simply be invited, not requested, to set an export quota. So we could be in this situation a year from now that nothing has happened and the case has disappeared off the radar, and it is a critically endangered species. It is being imported as source code W. So we align ourselves with the comments of Germany, the United States and Portugal. It should be retained as action as needed. The action is a relatively simple one, and Vietnam should be requested, not invited, to set a zero quota. I would just say finally that in the normal circumstances we understand Asia's point that you don't demand export quotas, but there are plenty of precedents for doing so in the context of this resolution. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Merci.
I would like to thank WWF.
Merci pour votre...
Thank you for your patience. The consultations take a little bit longer each time, but I think we have a proposal which could suit everyone. So I would invite the Secretariat to read the proposal.
Thank you, Chair. So it would be a stepwise approach where the Plans Committee will have a role in the recommendations, but then we will have the concerns not related to Article 13 conveyed to the Standing Committee. So at this stage, since there's strictly no concerns relating to the implementation of Article 4, under the RST process, what we would suggest is that the table in the English version of COM6, page 4, for Aquilaria krasna, Vietnam, the second to last comment to read as less concern. And then instead of the justification that you would see there, what we would like to reflect is the steps that the Plans Committee would be agreeing on. So the steps would be that the Plans Committee would be agreeing on is that before the next meeting of the Standing Committee, to invite Vietnam to issue a notification informing on their stricter domestic measures, particularly on the prohibition of export for wild specimens. Also to invite Vietnam to consider establishing and publishing a zero export quota for wild specimens on this species. And lastly, it's an invitation, it's not a request from the Plants Committee. It's just an invitation as a recommendation from the Plants Committee to invite Vietnam to establish that quota in line with their national legislation. And then lastly, to invite the Secretariat to report to the Standing Committee on progress made by Vietnam on these set of recommendations stemming from the Plants Committee for this case. So then in categorizing this case as less concern, that would mean that it is dropped strictly from the RST process, so then the recommendations that are at length later in the document would be dropped. They would no longer apply. But now to address also the concerns raised on aspects not related to Article 4, but rather on matters that are strictly the concern of the Standing Committee, what we would recommend is that in Annex 2, similar to what is reflected for Dalbergia melanoxylon for Mozambique, there would be a second paragraph relating to Vietnam and Aquilaria krasna, where the Standing Committee would be invited to consider, or we will bring to the attention to the Standing Committee the concerns of illegal trade and misreporting of source code. So the Standing Committee would be invited to consider those issues. So I hope this solution works.
Merci au secrétaire.
I thank the Secretariat for these proposals for the recommendations, and I now give the floor to Asia.
Thank you to the Secretariat for providing this proposal. We are agreeable to this. It is essentially classifying Vietnam as less concerned, but all the concerns over possible illegal exports and misreporting of trade would then be directed to the Standing Committee for their consideration. And I also like to thank all the colleagues who have made their points just now. I think many points were valid. I think we are here because we are concerned about the biodiversity crisis. We are concerned about sustainability. We are concerned that many critically endangered vulnerable populations in the world are affected by unsustainable harvesting. And we believe that many actions should be taken. However, regardless of the actions that we think others should take, this is CITES, this is a treaty, and this is a convention. We have rules and procedures to follow, and these are rules that are agreed upon by the parties who are, these are parties to the convention, and therefore to go outside of the rules that are agreed upon, unfortunately, I think it would undermine the spirit of the collaboration that is required for all parties to work together and solve these issues. And therefore, I would like to thank everybody for their comments and the Secretariat for this proposal. Thank you.
Je remercie.
I thank Asia for having accepted this recommendation proposal, and I now give the floor to Oceania.
Thank you, Chair. Just in light of the amendments suggested by the Secretariat and supported by my Asian colleague, I think that we would then need to delete from the general comments. It is paragraph 9 on page 6, where we made a general comment inviting the Secretariat to bring the issues of misreporting of artificially propagated exports by importers as wild source specimens to the attention of the Standing Committee. Thank you, Chair.
Merci au représentant.
I thank the representative of Oceania, and I now give the floor to the representative of Mozambique.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We were just going through the in-session document now, and we came across with on page, I think it's on page 4, the justification for revise the categorization of action needed for Mozambique is blank. It's not available there. But on the last page, which is on the page 18, the Standing Committee is invited to consider tasking Mozambique with the following action. In terms of short-term actions, Mozambique the Secretariat, the Standing Committee is tasking Mozambique to consider developing and implementing adequate control measures and expression procedure to detect and intercept illegal shipments of Dalbergia melanoxylon. And the justification that has been placed here is a little bit vague for us to understand, because it reads, current efforts to control the illegal harvest of Dalbergia do not appear to be effective and require strengthening. We would like to get a clear picture of what type of evidence should we provide so that our control measures appear effective and strengthened. Thank you, Madam.
Merci au Mozambique.
I thank Mozambique, and I will give the floor to the representative of Oceania.
Thank you, Chair. Just to clarify, if I understand our colleague from Mozambique, in that table that is on page 4 of ComDoc 6, where the 5th column has NA or not applicable, that was put there because it was already recommended as action as needed, so there was no recategorisation, so we did not need a justification. Thank you, Chair.
Merci.
I thank the representative of Oceania, the co-chair of this working group, on item 15.4. There are no further requests for the floor. So, please allow me to conclude on PC 27.6. Botanical Gardens International, you have the floor.
I thank the work of the Chair, Vice Chair and the working group for this document. We would like to make a minor change to the IGOs and NGOs membership of the working group, that Botanical Gardens International be corrected to Botanic Gardens Conservation International, which notes the removal of the AL to read as Botanic and not Botanical. Thank you, Chair.
Merci à la représentante.
I thank the representative of Botanic Gardens Conservation International.
Okay, donc nous avons.
So, we have document PC 27.6, which has been amended on the case of Vietnam, and the recommendation proposed has been accepted. Now I'm going to come back to the case of Ghana. So we'll have the following conclusion on Ghana, and the recommendation as amended would be the Plants Committee invites Ghana, if it so wishes, to submit an export quota for live specimens to make an NDF and the associated export quota for consideration by the Secretariat and the Plants Committee for their consideration. So that is the recommendation that covers the case of Ghana and the reviewed NDF and the quota that is related to that. Now I see a request for the floor from Indonesia. Indonesia, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for giving us the opportunity. Shortly, Indonesia would like to convey our comments on two species at the same time, if possible, under the RST review, which are the Aquilaria malacensis and the Gyrinopsis spp. First, on Gyrinopsis, Indonesia would like to thank the chair of the working group and the PC members and parties and observers representative and the secretariat for your kind consideration. So Gyrinopsis spp could be considered as least concern. But perhaps we would like to correct a little bit the justification column, because the zero quota should be clarified further to living trees in the column for Gyrinopsis, for living trees, as we have discussed in before. And second, on Aquilaria malacensis from the wild, we have listened during the discussion in plenary and working group in session carefully, and we acknowledge that we might not have submitted enough information for this species in our response. Hence, further actions would be needed for this species. Therefore, in the spirit of compromise, Indonesia is ready to accept the current proposed action plan, Madam Chair. But if it is possible, we would like to start consultation with the chair and secretariat to establish our interim quota for Aquilaria malacensis deriving from the wild during our meeting in Geneva, hopefully. And for your information, we have submitted an NDF for this matter yesterday to the secretariat, and we have requested the secretariat to publish it, Madam Chair. And on another note, Madam Chair, if we may, on the wise source code issue, we would like to request the committee that the proposed action be limited to a W source code only, and not including W source code only. The reason is because until now, we have not adopted the Y source code, because as far as we know, the code needs further adoptions in the next COP20. But most importantly, we have not adopted the Y source code because most, or maybe if not all, of our importer partners have not recognized this source code yet. So we would like to propose that the term a Y source code is deleted from the recommendation. And if we may also clarify, Madam Chair and colleagues, regarding this wild and non-wild issue, following our consultation with our experts and during the discussion, we would like to clarify that when we stated wild and non-wild in page 119 of our response, was not meant to refer that we don't understand, or we are mixing W, Y, or A source code. No, that's not at all. In fact, after this term, after the language in 119, we provided some explanation on how we distinguish between Y and A. Only between Y and A, because Y we have not adopted, as we have mentioned before. So perhaps we are not sure whether the Roman 2 short recommendation in the recommendation would still be necessary, but we look forward for guidance from the committee in this regard. Thank you, Chair.
Je vous remercie.
I thank the representative of Indonesia, so I shall give the floor to members of the committee for any comments on the proposals drawn up by Indonesia. Europe, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. Just with regard to some of the members from Indonesia, some of the interventions there, we would definitely like to hold on to the short-term actions, little Roman 2, and really that we can correctly identify and distinguish the artificially propagated specimens from the wild collected. And I think this would be something that's not clarified to date enough for us, and that we would definitely like to hold on to that little Roman 2 there. And then with regards to the export quota, I know Indonesia submitted some information to the Secretariat yesterday, and again, I would like to highlight that in the short-term actions, that basically we have to make use of the best available scientific information. I know not all members of the committee have seen the document submitted by Indonesia, but just looking at the quick overview, we do note that since the other day, since we spoke, that there hasn't been a full inventory of wild agarwood tree species since, and this has not been conducted, and that we would basically, ask Indonesia that they do an inventory of wild agarwood tree species before we could accept any look to this quota. That since we discussed this just a few days ago to now, has been the full population has not been conducted, and we just had some other comments that we might provide to them, but just that we would like to hold on to the recommendations in COM document 6 as is. Thank you.
Merci à la représentante.
I thank the representative for the Europe region, and I now give the floor to the representative for Asia.
Thank you, Chair. Given that Indonesia does not use the source code Y, we support the deletion of NY from short-term actions I. Regarding short-term actions I believe that what Indonesia is pointing out is that there was some error in the information that they have provided, which gave the impression that they could not reliably distinguish between wild harvested and artificially propagated specimens. But I believe that if the short-term actions II were to remain, Indonesia would still be able to meet these short-term recommendations. With regards to Indonesia's efforts to produce science-based evidence to support their quotas, And also in the case of Malaysia, I think we quote from resolution Conf 12.8 about review of significant trade to urge other parties and all stakeholders involved who are interested in the conservation and sustainable use of this species to be forthcoming with providing support and assistance to colleagues from Indonesia and Malaysia as they, in good faith in addressing the unique challenges of their respective cases, put together science-based evidence of how exports of these species can be non-detrimental to their wild populations. Thank you.
Merci au représentant de la...
I thank the representative for Asia. Do we have any further requests for the floor from members of the committee? Observer parties? I see no request for the floor, so I will give the floor to WWF.
Thank you, Madam Chair. From our point of view, we would like to thank Indonesia's constructive engagement on this subsequent to the discussions in the working group. They did also share the document with us, and we will be consulting with experts in our organisation and elsewhere about it. On the first reading, we do share the representative for Europe's concern that there is more work to be done. We also feel that Roman II should be retained, but we would anticipate, we hardly need to say this, that the summary record will note Indonesia's active and constructive engagement in submitting this document, and particularly note their clarification that they do not use source code Y and that by non-wild they actually meant A, because we do appreciate that that was a misunderstanding on the floor at the time. Thank you.
Je remercie le...
Thank you, WWF.
Merci.
We're now going to come back to the recommendations with respect to Indonesia. I'm going to read the conclusions and I will then give you the floor before we close this agenda item. With respect to the Girinops Indonesia combination, we should note that in the justification for the revised categorization, we need to add some language. The letter above indicates an zero export quota for living stands. Secondly, the recommendation with respect to Indonesia concerns deleting source code Y in short-term actions little 1 on Aquilaria malacensis, Indonesia. Then we have also taken note of the clarifications that Indonesia gave us with respect to the use of source code Y. These are the conclusions relating to the conclusions with respect to Indonesia. Could I ask Indonesia if this suits? You have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Indonesia appreciates the discussion and three things. First, we thank the correction on Girinops. It was actually clearer than our proposal. And two, we thank the committee members and parties and observers for their consideration on deleting Y source code in this regard because of the reasons we've mentioned. And three, on the Roman 2 for the short-term actions, we are amenable with the consideration of the committee in this regard. If it should be still there, we are amenable to it. And because we got clarification that we don't have an issue on distinction between W and A in this regard. And in addition, we are welcome if colleagues from other parties would like to learn about this in our country whenever you have possible. Thank you, Madam Chair and colleagues.
Je remercie.
Thank you, Indonesia, for that statement. I would suggest that we can now conclude on PC 27.6. The Plants Committee adopts PC 27.6 as presented and amended in session. Thank you.
Ok. Merci. Nous allons donc passer au...
Thank you. We're now going to move on to the next agenda item, the working group reports. We already have the sum doc for Thursday, that is to say, some 3. If we have the time after we've heard the regional reports, we will come back to some 3. On agenda item 42, I would like to give the floor to Africa, so Africa can present their regional report. You have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair, for allowing Africa to present the regional report at PC 27. Madam Chair, we apologize for not submitting the main report on time to the Secretariat. We register that the full report will be submitted as soon as possible. I also thank parties for submitting their country reports. Madam Chair, there are several activities accomplished by the Africa region, but now I'm going to mention just a few. We have carried out a review on significant trade for various tree species in Appendix 2, which are under RST process. We acknowledge and thank parties that RST process has been removed. Madam Chair, we have also developed non-detrimental findings on various species, in particular to rosewood species in various range states. But we have also carried out capacity building on various areas, including development of NDF using the 9 steps approach. And this was done during the International Expert Workshop on NDF that was held in Nairobi last year in December. A number of parties attended that workshop. Similarly, a similar workshop was also done in Douala in Cameroon this year. We have also coordinated a regional training in East African countries that were aimed of sharing experience and the transfer of knowledge in plant systematics, barcoding and informatics, and non-detrimental findings for Osiris lanceolata. Madam Chair, last but not least, we acknowledge continued coordination by CITES Secretariat, but also all conservation partners for their support on various conservation activities. Madam Chair, our full report will be soon posted in the CITES website, so we encourage and request every PC member, parties, and the observers to refer it to make a reference on that. I submit, Madam Chair. Thank you very much.
Je remercie le
I would like to thank the representative for the Africa region, and I now give the floor to the representative for Asia.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The regional representatives of Asia are pleased to present this report, PC 27 Doc 42.2, that consolidates inputs provided by 13 parties, representing 1/3 of the parties in Asia. The last year has been a busy year in terms of capacity building activities, meetings and workshops. There were many related publications, including field and identification guides, checklists, reports on wild populations, trade and production, workshop proceedings, guidelines on processes and best practices. Reports on non-detrimental findings are either in preparation or already submitted by several parties. Progress has been made on improving the identification of groups of plants and species and on the development of identification tools. On legislation and enforcement, several parties have established new or amended regulations and laws that relate to trade in plants and plant products and embarked on or made enhancements to electronic permit management systems. The report covers efforts made by parties on other topics such as artificial propagation, registration of plantations, enforcement against illegal trade, international cooperation, and outreach on wildlife legislation and the sustainable use of natural resources with different stakeholders. Nonetheless, a lot of work remains to be done in the Asia region to develop the financial, technical, and human resources to successfully implement CITES. This includes limited resources and knowledge of CITES at all levels, the lack of comprehensive and reliable data for science-based decision-making and identification techniques, materials and training, the need to harmonize national laws, develop traceability systems. All these incur monetary and opportunity costs in the face of competing developmental and economic priorities in Asia. I believe I speak on behalf of my fellow regional representatives when I say that serving this region has been incredibly humbling because we experience firsthand not just the incredible biological diversity, but also the cultural diversity across Asia, which in itself is a challenge. But we also understand how, paradoxically, we share many similarities, such as these shared challenges. Some shared tendencies, similar preferences for ways of solving problems, maybe also avoiding problems. The members and alternate members of the Plants Committee thank the parties from Asia for working with us, and on behalf of the parties from Asia, we thank other parties and our fellow regional committee members for their patience and collegiality in tackling issues together at this meeting. Thank you.
Merci.
I would like to thank the Asia representative. I now give the floor to the representative for Central and South America and the Caribbean. You have the floor. Thank you, Madam Chair. First of all, I would like to say that this is a report that is prepared thanks to Argentina, Brazil, Chile, Colombia, Costa Rica, Cuba, El Salvador, Honduras, Nicaragua, Panama, Peru, the Dominican Republic, Trinidad and Tobago, all responded to my request for information, and they all reported on efforts being made with respect to CITES implementation for the period concerned from June 23 until May of 2024. With respect to the main progress made, Brazil gave information on working groups for the development of NDFs for Andrantes tabua and Dipteryx in order to develop a national strategy to protect Brasilia echinata. Chile gave information on efforts made with respect to Araucaria, and also talked about efforts made to rescue cactaceans. And there are efforts being made to ensure that efforts are being made with respect to export measures. And there is a special effort underway to inspect the situation that are under particular pressure, particularly border regions and with certain particular species. Colombia gave information with respect to the efforts being come with respect to Dalbergia, Dipteryx, Hydranthus, Rosiadron, and Tabulia. Work is being done with the scientific authority in order to ensure that there are NDFs for tree species. They also gave information on the consolidation of NDFs and LAFs for sedula. We also heard about NDFs that have been issued for Cedrela odorata and for updating being made with respect to Dalbergia retusa. That is for Colombia. Cuba gave information on national environmental legislation, which covers biodiversity and CITES implementation. This was updated in 2023 and came into force in 2024. With respect to El Salvador, we had information on activities undertaken on follow-up for national actions with respect to Dalbergia and Flora plants listed in Appendix 2, and special measures being taken with respect to exports of plants and work being done with herbariums so that there can be exchange of botanic samples, as well as a guide to trees and a national forest inventory, as well as a Dalbergia species being incorporated into the list of species under threat that was done last year. And they also have information on illegal tree felling and illegal trade for tree species and wildlife. We also have information on identification and capacity building with respect to customs officers and wildlife centers. Nicaragua provided information on work being done with the Secretariat so that there can be a national survey of Dalbergia retusa, this with respect to significant trade. They also reported to Dalbergia tucurensis, this with respect to Article 4 of the Convention. Panama reported that they have maintained the restriction for Cocobolo, Dalbergia retuso, because there are no NDFs. Peru now, there is information on LAFs and NDFs, as well as revisions to the domestic system for NDFs, as well as a national plan for dipteryx and hydranthus being CITES Appendix 2 listed, and efforts being made with respect to sustainable forestry and monitoring the entire timber production system. Then there is information with respect to, in the Dominican Republic, measures being taken with respect to wildlife and NDFs. On LAFs, the Dominican Republic reported that there are being proper analysis and decisions are being taken. Trinidad and Tobago now, they reported that efforts are being made to protect CITES species and working with those who are responsible for forestry management to ensure that they are acting in compliance with legislation and doing everything to combat illegal trade. I would also like to take this opportunity to say that my colleague and I, as national representatives for this region, participated in a number of different meetings and activities that took place in the region. So we had some online meetings for those involved in NDFs, capacity building courses for timber species and orchids, that this was done by the Amazon Corporation region. And we also had a work on NDFs for tree species. We also jointly worked with the regional representative for the Animals Committee to have a regional preparatory meeting for these committees. That too was held online. And I would like to take this opportunity to say how actively parties joined in those activities. And I'm very grateful to all the support from countries in the region. With respect to our priorities, we've seen that Argentina has interest in there being capacity building with respect to trees, so that there is work being done on timber identification. Brazil would like to see, has welcomed all the cooperation that has involved exchange of information on dipteris and hydroacanthus as its inclusion in the CITES Appendices. Others, Chile welcomed the identification work being done on cactaceans. Colombia gave information on headway being made with respect to a project for a population study of populations that have recently been listed in the appendices. Costa Rica talked about its work with the United States Forestry Service on CITES-related matters. A number of different activities have been undertaken in the region, And we've also heard about a number of meetings and workshops. All of this serves to show how much CITES means to the region. I would invite you to read the report, which is online. It does go into quite some detail, and I would like to thank you for having given me the opportunity to give you just some sense of what is underway in the region on these issues. Thank you for your attention.
Merci beaucoup, Madame.
Thank you, Madam. Representative of the Central and South American and the Caribbean region, I would now like to give the floor to the representative for Europe.
Thank you, Madam Chair. As the European region covers 49 parties, we reached out and got 15 responses. So therefore, I will highlight only just part of them because you can read the complete report as document 4240. So, for example, amongst others, Portugal pointed out that they had a meeting in November 2023. So the Portuguese CITES authorities participated in a Europol-coordinated international operation against the illegal timber trade, involving law enforcement authorities from France, Germany, Italy, the Netherlands, Portugal, and Spain. The Brazilian authorities were also involved, as well as police forces from Costa Rica and Panama, who joined this recurring operation for the first time. So Norway issued 3 publications with a bearing on regulations of plants under CITES from Norwegian research environment, especially in relation to DNA-based identification. Germany was involved and sponsored projects on NDF, also on resource assessments and implementation of CITES for tree species and timber ID, the CITES Wood ID. Germany also refers to the update of CITES Wood ID as free available app in app stores and as a universal Windows program. Slovenia had the CITES Plants of Europe 2021 in partnership with other countries through European Cooperation in Science and Technology called COST, Action 18210, an integrated approach to conservation of threatened plants for the 21st century. Then there was the European region. They have provided funding to carry out a number of initiatives to support CITES implementation that are relevant to the work of the Plants Committee. In particular, the EU has supported the CITES Secretariat in the implementation of COP19 decisions. An allocation of $3 million was made for this purpose, and the EU has also funded the Species Plus website and status assessments for many CITES listed species, as well as EU Twigs for the exchange of information on CITES enforcement issues. Then also EU reported a revision of the EU wildlife trade regulations. And in September 2023, the EU, together with the WCS, held an event scaling up EU impact to combat wildlife trafficking, renewing commitment through the revised EU WAP in Brussels. Thank you, Madam Chair.
I would like to thank the representative of Europe, and I now give the floor to the representative for North America.
Thank you, Chair. The North America Regional Report covers the period from May 2023 to April 2024, and I present here some highlights from the report. In the section under non-detriment findings, NDFs made in the region are reported for diverse plant species, including Euphorbia antisyphilitica and Echinoceras cinerensis in Mexico, and the newly listed Rhodiola rosea in Canada. Under the section for capacity building, the United States Forest Service provided training to forest inspectors in Mexico on the identification of tropical wood species. US and Mexican government agencies collaborated on developing guidelines for forest inspection and surveillance, focusing on wood identification, measurement and cubing of wood, and forestry crime. A number of capacity building activities outside the region were carried out and/or funded by the United States. Under regional cooperation and priorities, the three countries met at 2 annual meetings of the Canada-Mexico-US Trilateral Committee for Wildlife and Ecosystem Conservation and Management. Mexico hosted a virtual meeting in the summer of 2023, and the US hosted a meeting in San Diego, California in the spring of 2024. Both meetings had overarching themes centered on environmental justice, biodiversity, and indigenous peoples. CITES tables at both meetings provided a forum for discussion of CITES-related reports and issues, while enforcement tables addressed issues pertaining to illegal wildlife trade. Activities of the North American Forest Commission Working Group are described in the report. This working group is tasked with identifying and addressing challenges relating to illegal logging, wood identification and traceability in the North American region by developing a comprehensive action plan to promote transboundary cooperation, effective tools for information sharing, and preventative and corrective measures to protect and conserve forest resources. Under the Commission for Environmental Cooperation, the three countries in the region concluded their participation in the project strengthening the implementation and effective enforcement of CITES for timber in North America. This included establishing a collaboration between laboratories from the three countries in 2023 with the aim of strengthening forensic and research capacity for wood identification. Also, under the Commission for Environmental Cooperation, a workshop on the implementation and issuance of NDFs for CITES Source Code Y was held in Oaxaca, Mexico in July of 2023. The section meetings and workshops held outside the region, reports on a workshop organized by the U.S. Forest Service in Costa Rica, where wood species identification has been focused on the genera of Dalbergia, Cedrela, and Dipteryx. The workshop was entitled Anatomical Identification of Woods and Use and Management of the Xylotron. Workshop experts, including from Canada, focused on various wood species identification methodologies, theoretical and practical, including microscopic, ethanol, and fluorescent techniques, as well as the use of the Xylotron, which involves machine vision learning. In the concluding section, Other Regional Information, Canada reports on the development of a targeting system to identify commercial import shipments containing CITES-listed wood species. Canada also reports on a project focused on the trade of CITES-listed species that are used in the indoor plant trade with an emphasis on the Cactaceae family. Mexico reports on activities of its law enforcement focal point with respect to verification of shipments with regulated wild species, prevention and detection of international illegal trafficking of wildlife species at international airports and land crossings, and collaboration with such international organizations as Interpol and the World Customs Organization for the purpose of addressing international trafficking in wildlife and forest resources. The United States reports on a national seed strategy Keystone Initiative, which will create a centralized interagency seed and restoration center. This science-based effort will increase the supply of genetically diverse plant species needed for ecological restoration and will benefit many CITES-listed species in the region. That concludes my summary of the report. Thank you, Chair.
Je remercie.
I thank the representative for the North America region, and I now give the floor to the representative of Oceania.
Thank you, Chair. The Oceania report was submitted after the document deadline, and I appreciate the committee's indulgence for the late submission. I provide my condolences to Tonga for the recent passing of Mr. Pauasinigualafi and acknowledge his efforts over many years in contributing to the work of CITES in the region. During the intersessional period, I had the honour of supporting the NDF workshop in Nairobi on behalf of the Chair of the Plants Committee, and I am pleased to see the development of recent modules, or relevant modules on guidance related to plants as part of the NDF guidance. These modules will provide substantial support to parties in the region in the development of NDFs, and I thank IUCN, the NDF Technical Advisory Group, the Secretariat and funders for making this guidance a reality. Being a region comprising of more ocean than terrestrial lands, matters relating to international trade in plants feature in the discussions on CITES to a lesser extent than those on fauna. However, as more trees and plants are added to the appendices in other regions, as happened with a substantial number of listings at COP19, I am anticipating that we will encounter an increase in the need to support work on plant matters in Oceania in the years ahead. For this reason, many parties in the Oceania region continue to identify the need for financial and capacity building support. I commend the Secretariat and the various funders who have already supported capacity building efforts throughout Oceania and for their efforts to identify potential opportunities for continuing to provide such support in the future. Thank you, Chair.
Merci.
I thank the representative of Oceania for the presentation of the regional report. So now we have come to the end of item 42 on the regional reports. And if I recall correctly, we're going to start again this afternoon with the opening of the 33rd meeting of the Animals Committee. And at 2:30 p.m. we will start our joint session with the 33rd meeting of the Animals Committee, and then the closure of the 27th Plants meeting will take place after 4 p.m. on Saturday, the 13th of July.
Je suis fatiguée. J'ai oublié que je vous ai...
I forgot that I had said we were going to look at PC 27 Sum 3, which is the executive summary of Thursday, the 11th of July. It is available online, and I await your comments.
Le secrétariat...
The Secretariat will give us information on a correction to the document. Thank you, Madam Chair. The Secretariat is tired as well. Yesterday evening when we drafted the executive summary, if you look, the error is in the 3 languages. If you look at page 7 of the document PC 27 Sum 3, we wanted to say that Mexico had been part of the working group of the... We said the membership of the committee included Mexico, and we wanted to say that Mexico was present. Thank you.
Merci au secrétariat pour cette...
I thank the Secretariat for that information. Now I would like to see if any members of the committee, any observer parties or observers have comments on document PC 27 Sum 3. Mexico.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This is an editorial correction on page 1 in 9B. We have 2 amendments to adequately reflect what the North American region proposed as the text for the annex. It should say list of potential CITES activities and products and their contribution to the objectives, targets, and complementary voluntary actions to the global strategy for plant conservation. That means we need to delete the word "and" in the second line before targets, to delete the word "updated" before global strategy for plant conservation, and to delete 23-2030, to be precise. Also, in next III subparagraph, to delete GSPC before objectives and to delete GSPC targets, because it should say maintain the last table in the index that maps the global strategy for plant conservation objectives, targets in plural, and CITES potential contribution. Thank you very much.
Merci au Mexique.
I thank Mexico. Now I give the floor to the United Kingdom.
Thank you, Chair. We have a small comment on the document. In the section on document 26, Boswellia species on page 2, the UK had understood our amendment had been accepted as we proposed, which amended decision 20WW little c to be moved to 20WW little a, Roman numeral 5. This would clarify that the industry stakeholders will be invited to a future Boswellia meeting. Please could this change be considered? Thank you.
Royaume-Uni.
United Kingdom, you would like us to...
No. Royaume-Uni.
United Kingdom, we will give the floor to the working group chair, the representative from Europe, so we have further clarification.
Thank you, Chair. I'm just curious as to, the subject, whether this would be subject to external funding to invite industries. I'm not so sure if that's quite relevant. I don't mind the UK moving and their change of text there, but I just wonder, subject to external funding, that we limit the subject to external funding to the meeting of stakeholders, the exchange of information, and those ones, and not necessarily the invitation to industries. Yeah.
Avant que je donne la parole au...
Before I give the floor to Canada, Under decision 20WW, the subject to external funding is the chapeau for paragraph A, paragraph B, C, D, and E. It's just some more information that it is subject. So it says subject to external funding, and all of those that have been tasked to the Secretariat depending on that chapeau. Canada, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. For item 14 on the tree species program, decision E, invited the Secretariat to continue informing the parties of the availability of funds. We understood the decision to also include informing parties of the selection criteria of the program, as well as the terms of reference for the advisory committee under the new phase of the program. So to insert those two items. For item 27 on Rosewood, Canada had the impression that the title change of the report was agreed to, so that would have the implication for a C, Roman numeral 4, rather than consider amending, it would be changed to amend the title of the report to include the inclusion of CITES listed tree species not in the family Leguminosae, and add by deleting Leguminosae fabaceae, and that would also be reflected in decision 20.BB. Thank you, Chair.
Merci au Canada.
Thank you, Canada.
Représentant de...
The representative of Europe, you have requested the floor. Could you please us on which agenda item your comment is?
Thank you very much. This is with agenda item 26, Boswellia trees.
Je vous écoute.
Please go ahead.
Okay, as it is written in directed to the Secretariat, 20 WW, Part C, the intention of the working group was for the Secretariat to participate in industry meetings, not necessarily to invite the industry to their own meetings. So maybe if the UK could look at that paragraph again, and the intention of the working group was the Secretariat should participate in the industry meetings and not for the industry to be invited to their own meetings. So maybe if the UK could just clarify there. Thank you. That we would like to go back to the original intention of that paragraph for the Secretariat to reach out to the industry. Yeah.
Oui, je vais...
Yes, I shall give the floor to the United Kingdom, but on reading this paragraph, it seems to me now that we're inviting industries that are relevant to the trade in Boswellia to strengthen stakeholder engagement in CITES processes and ongoing efforts to improve the conservation and management of Boswellia species. So on reading it and the way I understand it, we're not inviting them to participate in their own meetings, but we're calling for them to strengthen stakeholder engagement. I hope that is clearer.
Ce que je voulais dire, c'est que...
What I wanted to say is that the draft decision as set out and presented here is that which I had presented when I was concluding on this item. So it should be a faithful transcription of what was said in the meeting. I don't know if we need to modify this decision again and come back to discuss this in plenary. Europe, you've requested the floor. Would you still like?
Well, if I take your point as to this was discussed in the meeting, the one thing I would say that this should not be then subject to external funding. Thank you. If you want to keep the wording, I would separate this and keep it as separate to subject to external funding. You know, to invite, we don't need to fund industries there. Thank you.
So, if I understand correctly, Europe, you would like that subject to external funding be the chapeau just of subparagraph A.
Là, je reviens vers la représentante.
So I'll come back to the representative for Europe. If we change the wording of the decision, that means that we are reopening the debate. So it's a matter of the subject to external funding. So there is the potential that should there not be external funding, we could work that way, I think. Would that work?
I think that is sous réserve. If you got
Talking? Sorry, can you just explain where you're going to put subject to external funding? The way it is? Are limited to Part A, which is which we prefer, which was the preference of the working group.
Oui, dans mon...
Yes. I would leave it where it is. Because, yes, there was the working group decision, but then in plenary, we decided to put it there as the chapeau to the decision 20WW, and that was then adopted in plenary. So what has been adopted in plenary is reflected here in the executive summary.
Sorry, I would just, we would just say that subject to external funding does not make sense with 20WW, C, D, and E in that section now if you put it to the whole decision. So I would just say subject to external funding, inviting industries would not be relevant to subject to external funding. Liaison with World Customs Organizations, again, should not be subject to external funding, and presenting information to the Plants Committee would not be subject to external funding. Thank you.
La compilation...
But the compilation of the information requires financing, I think.
Okay. Madame la représentante de...
So, to the representative of Europe, what we're doing is we are discussing the substance of the decision that we had agreed on when we adopted the document. So what I would suggest is that we take note of your comments on paragraph C of decision 20WW and the link to subject to external funding.
Si je vous propose...
I make this suggestion because I really don't want us to end up going back to the recording to see or hear what was said. This text reflects what was said at the meeting, and I would like us to make some headway here. So Europe, can you go along with my proposal? I have had other requests for the floor. I hope not about item 26. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, if it could be reflected in the summer report, that would be great. Yeah, thank you. I don't think there is a change to the substance. It's just really around on what requires external funding. Thank you.
Yeah. Je vous remercie.
Thank you. The representative of Europe. I'm now going to give the floor to the Africa representative, hoping that this is not on item 26. You have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Sorry, just a minor correction on the same item, the 20 WW, but on B. We will recommend that provide financial travel support. I could say that, just to say provide financial support to enable arrange states to attend Busore meetings instead of putting word travel. Yeah, so it's just a minor suggestion.
Merci pour...
Thank you for that. The representative of Africa. I have the two versions before me. I have the French and the English. And the French version does not seem to mention travel. The French says simply provide financial assistance to allow, and here we have financial travel support to enable range states to attend the meetings. I do think that the French version is the original that was translated. No, was it the opposite? I think there is a problem in that the two versions are not the same.
Est-ce que vous pouvez répéter?
Could I ask you to please repeat what you had to say, Africa?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. In the English version, it says that on B, provide financial travel support. So my suggestion is that we delete the word travel. It remain with like the French version is okay. Thank you.
Merci.
Thank you, the representative of the Africa region, for that comment. What we're going to do is look back at what was actually said during that meeting. I would suggest that we not adopt this document and that we wait until we've been able to double check. I also wanted to come back to another matter.
Je vais demander.
I'm going to give the floor to the Secretariat.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to quickly explain the point of an executive summary and what is supposed to be in there and what is not supposed to be in there. The point of the executive summary is to write down the conclusions on each agenda item as formulated by the chair. So it's really at the end of the debate. You listen to her. I listen to her in French, actually. It always is in the language that she uses, that is the key element. And I write down what she said. So the point is not to reopen. Normally the decision has been taken in the previous sessions. We're just checking, we're writing down what was said. That is really the point of the executive summary. Now, I can make mistakes, we can make mistakes. I put Mexico as member of committee, clearly it was member of working group, so it's possible. But the point is to really capture what was said by the chair. So I think to the comment of Canada about adding, I forgot what needed to be added on little e of 14, I'm quite sure that's not what she said, but I will double check the tape, and if it is what she said, it will be added. That is always the approach for all the changes to the executive summary, except when there's an extra and or there's some, clearly obvious grammatical mistake. So I think for all the interventions, so I think that relates to 14, the issue of Leguminosae and to Boswellia. We will go back to the tape. We have the tape in the floor always, and we will double check. And in any case, I think if I understood correctly, the executive summary is not adopted yet. The Plants Committee is meeting until tomorrow night, and we will come back to you with any revisions if necessary based on the interventions on the floor. Thank you. Oh yes, sorry. And then I also need to explain the summary record. So the executive summary is only the decisions taken by this committee. That's what it is. The summary records always includes the interventions on the floor. So sometimes when we say we note the comments made in plenary, in the summary record you will have actually the explanations of the comments made in plenary, etc. I think there was comments about Indonesia noting the source code. Why? Indeed, that will be part of the summary record. That's a much longer document that should be ready about 40 days after this meeting. Thank you.
Merci.
I'd like to thank the Secretariat for that clarification. I now give the floor to Cameroon. Thank you, Madam. And it's kind of you to give me the floor despite the fact that it's a bit late in the day and everyone's getting tired. With respect to 15.44, you said that was just on Cameroon that the Secretariat is to be invited to raise the question of the missing report for 2017 to 22. If I am not mistaken, we did actually make that available report and have not had it acknowledged. So I simply wish to say that the reports are available and they have been sent, and if necessary we can send them again, but I would be grateful if that recommendation could be amended.
Merci, Cameroun.
Thank you, Cameroon.
Cameroun,
Cameroon, we're going to take account of your comments and they will be reflected in the executive summary of this meeting because PC 27 COM 6 was adopted this morning. Oceania, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. I think in relation to this one for Gilbertia tasmanii, Cameroon, in consultation with UNEP WCMC, the annual reports for 2017 to 2022 were submitted, but it was the reports relating specifically to Flora that were not submitted. So that was what the UNEP WCMC report was referring to, and that's why it's been included in the general comments. Thank you, Chair.
merci pour cette explication.
Thank you for that explanation, sir. Cameroon, you've just had a clarification with respect to your concern on Gilbertia tasmanii in COM 6. Would you like to take the floor? Thank you. In the light of that comment, we're not talking about the report on Gilbertia, but on Flora, and we will make that available to you as soon as possible. Thank you for your understanding, Cameroon.
Okay. Donc,
as agreed, we are going to adjourn the meeting and we will be coming back to you with respect to PC 27 Sum 3 after we have checked the recordings. So enjoy your lunch.